You're listening to the Nightlight Radio Network. This is Dr. Zoh Hieronimus, co-host of 21st Century Radio. We are happy to present this rebroadcast of our show on Nightlight. Enjoy. John Perkins has joined us on other occasions, as he does again this evening. John is author of Economic Hitman, Hoodwinked, The Secret History of the American Empire, Shapeshifting, Techniques for Global and Personal Transformation, Psychonavigation, Techniques for Travel Beyond Time, and other books as well. Some of them are Inner Traditions, which you can find at innertraditions.org. John is a wonderful example of how our inner personal landscape can change and then change our lives, the same way the outer of the world looks a lot like the inner of our worlds. How do we then move from the personal inner landscape to the global world, and how can each of us contribute? How do our dreams, our intentions, and actions shape and shift the world around us? Traveling to learn from shamans of numerous indigenous cultures, John Perkins brings to his audiences an awareness that I believe is precious, reminding us that the world out there really does reflect the inner world. And the inner world really does offer us insights and guidance for transforming not only ourselves, but our shared physical and the spiritual worlds we're all part of. John Perkins' own life is truly an example of shape-shifting, of turning, of changing, of transforming that which we all do on our spiritual journeys in a lifetime. Thank you again for joining us, John.
It's great to be with you. Thank you for having me, Zoh.
Absolutely. You know, when we've been together before, we've talked about your books, Economic Hitman and Hoodwinked, and sort of the other life of John Perkins, the before the John Perkins now. How would you describe to our audience kind of what happened in your career life to send you down this path that now really involves this beautiful psycho-navigation, the shamanic world, and other very rich spiritual pathways?
Well, yeah, I'll get into that. And I also, before the show's over, I want to tell you what a role you play in my new book, you personally. So we'll get into that in a few minutes.
All right.
But, so as I was what we call an economic hitman, I was actually chief economist at this major international consulting firm. At the beginning, I thought the things that we were doing were the right things for creating a better world. I thought that by investing billions of dollars from the World Bank into the infrastructure projects like power plants and industrial parks in developing countries, you were really helping those countries. But as time went on, what I saw was that this was a big scam. It was a way of getting the countries so deep into debt that they would have to sell off their oil or other valuable resources to our corporations at very cheap prices without any social or environmental regulations, and that they would never be able to pay off the debts, and that the money would actually never go to them. These billions of dollars never went to the countries. It went to our own companies to build these infrastructure projects. And at the beginning, I thought this was the right way to do things because that's what you learn in business school. That's what the World Bank says. And economic models show that it does help the economy to grow. What the models don't show, and what I began to realize as time went on, is that all this was really doing was helping a bunch of very rich families in these countries, as well as our corporations, get richer and richer and more powerful. Meanwhile, the poor and the middle classes were getting poorer and poorer. But it took me a while to realize that. And once I realized it, then I realized that I had to get out, and that's when the transformation really began to happen.
How old were you at that point?
Well, I went into that business when I was 26 years old. I was in for 10 years. So it was during that period of my basically late 20s and early to mid-30s that this was going on. And, I've been through all the schooling. I've been in the Peace Corps. I've been in Ecuador for 3 years. So I'd been around a bit, but I was pretty naive about the way the business world operates. Mm-hmm. And in fact, most people are in that business because business schools make people naive. They don't really teach you what the real world is about out there.
Right. No, they teach you to take part in the models that already exist, and the models are hierarchical, exploitive, oligarchies, something I covered ad nauseum for almost 20 years of my life and 10 years every day of the week. So, we're on the same page from a different vantage point. And I always found it a challenge as a person with a deep spiritual calling and yet also a political and economic astuteness to bring those two aspects of myself into play in a way that was balanced, which is one of the things actually that has intrigued me about sort of looking at you as one of these adventurers who has been able to still comment. I follow what you write, and I was reading a recent piece you were writing about, our bad habits, and then you list Iraq and Cuba and kind of, once again, what is a war economy for and why are we doing this?
Yeah, well, and that's what I wanted to tell you is that, you, and the last time we talked, you kind of coined the phrases for me of a death economy and a life economy. And I'm using that a lot in my new book and these days, and I'll be crediting you with that in the new book. But, that really comes down to the crux of it, that what we're understanding today is that we've created a global catastrophe economically for most of the people of the world. It's an absolute failure. It's a success for a handful of people. The 85 individuals who have more assets than half the world, and other people, it seems like a success for them. Ultimately, it won't work for them either. But the fact is, it's an abject failure in every other way, and we've really created this death economy, which is based on warfare or the threat of it, and ravaging the earth, tearing up the very resources upon which our economy depends.
Exactly. I've been studying the white spirit animals of the world. I have an interest in, they all came to me en masse in a single vision and said, write our story. So there's the white tiger and the white lion and the white buffalo and the white elephant, et cetera, et cetera. And they're all like epicenters of ecosystems around the world. They all are deeply part of shamanic traditions in the regions in which they exist, and they all speak to prophecy of this transformational time period. And interestingly enough, most of the lore and mythology associated with them has to do with a prior glacial age, and that it's heralding such major earth changes. We're in this interglacial period, and that we're moving into a glacial age. So if we could sort of shift gears to this beautiful work you do as you travel the world now and helping people find their inner navigator, the way the shamans have for millennium. What is it when you say that somebody is practicing shamanic practice or somebody is shape-shifting?
Well, there's a lot of answers to that question, Zohara. I think the simple one to start with is a definition, the simplest definition that I know for a shaman that I like is a woman or a man who journeys to other worlds. And you can say prayer is that, and meditation is that, just inspiration is that. And anybody who writes a book or a song or music is gathering information from other worlds. In any case, the shaman journeys to other worlds and uses the energy, power, and wisdom from those worlds to affect change in this world. So, yeah, I think probably everybody journeys to other worlds, daydreaming, thinking, dreaming is going to another world. And then there's, priests and meditators and yogis and people who do that on a sort of a professional basis. But the shaman must always use the information that she or he gains, the energy, the power from those journeys to affect change in this world. And people think of shamans as healers, and yes, a lot of them are, and so they affect change in their clients, but cults. They're trying to help them get better. But shamans throughout the world also have done a great deal of work on affecting change in environments and social attitudes amongst their people, their tribes, their clans. And so right now we're at a time in history where we really, really need this. And they talk about shape-shifting as occurring on three different levels. One is the cellular, the biological level. Shamans shape-shifting into jaguars, which a lot of people have a hard time believing, but healing a wound is a cellular shapeshift. Getting cancer is a cellular shapeshift, and a lot of us know of people who seem to have miraculous cures of cancer. That's the shapeshift. That's the cellular biological shapeshift. Then there's the personal shapeshifting, being more of who we most respect about ourselves, being a better writer, being a better dancer, being a better spouse, whatever, and getting rid of addiction. That's just personal. And then there's the institutional. And right now, and they all come together in many respects, but right now that institutional one is so important because around the planet, people are waking up. We're in this consciousness revolution where people are really waking up to the fact that this system just is not working. That we've got to change it, that the oceans are rising, the glaciers are melting, species are going extinct at incredibly fast rates, our economies are not working. People are waking up to that, and it means we need to change our institutions. We need to change our story, basically.
When all of us look out at the world and we can see the decimation, and certainly this show has been committed to talking about all the wonderful discoveries that have already been made, whether it's in sustainable energies or in biobiology, which is eco-housing, or holistic healing, or as you speak of traveling to inner worlds, outer worlds, off planet, in planet, and that truly it is a radical moment when sort of all the rivers come together within each one of us. But I think for everybody who has been working for change their whole lives, and I interview many activists who are eco-activists or social justice or political change agents, sometimes it's very difficult to find one's bearings while some things are coming apart, trying to birth new things. And I thought perhaps as you do for some of your workshop attendants, you give people some other tools about these levels you've spoken of. So there's this biological level, there's the personal ourselves, there's the institutional. How does any one of us change ourselves?
Well, I think, first of all, we have to recognize that we need to change and we want to change on an individual basis. You can't change another person. You can't change yourself unless you realize that you need to change. There's got to be a motivation there. And that's true on the social level too, which is what we are understanding as a species now, that we've gone down the wrong path, or maybe it was the right path for a long time, but it needs to change now.
Right. So first desire.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's about applying energy. So to recognize that everything is energy. Basically we're comprised of energy. That scientists tell us that we're 99.999% air. A lot of people think water, but that's basically air, H2O. And they used to say that the other 0.0001% were subatomic particles. But now quantum physics say that other 0.0001% is a probability of energy, and how we direct that energy is what's important. So we're mostly air and then a little bit of probability of energy. What are we? We're what we choose to be and where we direct our energies. And I think it's really important for people to understand if you're angry, if you're upset, if you're feeling jealous, if you're feeling any of what we call the negative emotions, to recognize the power in those. And if you're discouraged by what's going on in the world, recognize the power, and to understand that emotion is just energy. And now what's important is how do you direct it? You've got it. Don't try to deny it. People say, I don't want to be angry. I don't want to be jealous. I want to be forgiving. Well, okay, good. But if the anger is there, the important thing is what do you do with it? So I'm incredibly angry, and anybody that really sees what's going on in the world has to feel angry. I'm incredibly angry at what my government and many of our corporations are doing in the world. And for many years, I used that anger destructively and often self-destructively. It got the better of me. You burn out with it. But now I have a lot of fun with it. I'm having fun talking to you about it. Mm-hmm. I do workshops. I travel around the world. I write books. That's fun. I'm still angry. But the way I'm choosing to direct the energy is in a self-sustaining way. I'm not burning out. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I love my life these days. And the anger's still there, but I feel that I'm using it in productive ways. And I think that's a very important thing for people to understand, both on an individual and on a collective basis, that it's all about energy. If you're having a tough time in your relationship with your partner, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your spouse, whatever, how do you direct that energy in a way that's going to accomplish what it is that will really be positive for everybody?
Beautifully put. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, I want to talk some more about psychonavigation, because the techniques, as you mentioned, when people dream, everybody dreams. Not everybody remembers all their dreams, but everybody remembers some of their dreams, and can sometimes tell the difference between just a personal dream, a dream that's premonitory, a dream that's a futuristic dream. And so we'll talk about how it is that imaging and imagination is so important. If you're just joining us, John Perkins, our guest. Take a look at all of his books at www.johnperkins.org. Meet him someplace on the planet. He travels around in good stead.
Hello, I'm Jason Gregory. I'm the author of The Science and Practice of Humility, The Path to Ultimate Freedom. You can find out all the information about me from www.jasongregory.org. You are listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zoh Hieronimus.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. John Perkins joins us. Find out all about his travels, workshops, beautiful books, many of them published by Inner Traditions. We share a wonderful publisher, Ehud Sperling's outfit, with a great group of men and women. www.johnperkins.org. In fact, while I mention Ehud Sperling, I saw that the two of you together convinced this beautiful gentleman from the Shuar Warrior. Is that how you say that? Shuar Warrior?
Yes, that's right, Shuar.
Shuar Warrior in Ecuador and Peru to go around collecting the stories of his peoples. Talk to us a bit about that. It's a wonderful undertaking.
Yeah, that's Ehud Sperling, the founder of Inner Traditions, is a very old and dear friend of mine. And I think the first book of mine that he published was around 1987 or 88 in that area, Stress Free Habit. And then he published Psychonavigation and a couple of other books. And we went to the Amazon together a couple of times. He asked me to take him to meet people that I was writing about, and I did. And it was a fantastic experience. And Ehud himself got deeply involved. And came up with this idea that we might give tape recorders, little handheld ones, to some of the younger Shuar warriors, young men who would go out into the jungle, and they would go way off to elders who no one had seen them. Some of them had never even met white men, and talk to them in their native language, Shuar, record it, and then the Shuar would, the young Shuar who spoke Spanish would simultaneously translate into the recorder back into English, and then we would translate it from translate back into Spanish, and then we would translate the Spanish to English. And so we collected this body of incredible stories and memories of the elders who were, some of them were over 100 years old, and it's in a book called Spirit of the Shuar, which is published by Inner Traditions.
It's just beautiful.
Yeah, it was an amazing experience, and it was actually very interesting from a personal standpoint because at the time my dad was retired and he was a retired Spanish teacher, and so I actually had him translate from the Spanish to English. He wrote in longhand because he didn't use a computer. My daughter, who was 17 at the time, Jessica, then typed it up on the computer. And then I would go back in and massage because my dad's translations were pretty dry, just kind of straightforward. And I know the way the Shuar tell stories, they're oral traditionalists, and they tell stories with great beauty, and emotion. And so I tried to put some of that back in. But it was very funny because they talked about some of their sexual habits, which were, by our standards, quite bizarre and quite promiscuous, and about the use of sacred plants that we would call hallucinogenics. My dad was very conservative. And he would write these little notes knowing that his granddaughter was going to be reading all of this. He'd say, well, I don't quite believe that, but that's what he said, so I'm translating it.
But that's the point. What's so interesting is the change that is happening. There are many millions of humans who have been practicing meditation, who have been doing far journeying, who have been doing collaborative, building good, positive work. And there are others who have really just been trying to live a life, pay the mortgage, take care of business, but may not have much belief about spirit. And the spirit of the Shuar, the wisdom from the last unconquered people of the Amazon, talks about the Arutum, or the life-giving spirit of nature. I don't know if I've pronounced it properly.
You did, yes.
That allows us to change ourselves. So you mentioned the key to change our story. Do you think that changing our story then changes the energy we draw to us? Give us some examples of how a person can do this effectively in their own life and how, in the global sense, changing our story can literally change the way form, matter, energy manifests.
Yes, well, I talked, Zohara, in one of my books, I think it's Shapeshifting, about how I became deathly ill at one time when I was living with the Shuar in the Amazon. This is long before I'd written any books. I was a Peace Corps volunteer, late 60s. And a shaman healed me. And the way he did that actually was taking me all night long shamanic journey. And on that journey, I saw that I had grown up with a lot of attitude about hygiene. You had to wash your hands a lot. And I grew up in New Hampshire, Yankee Calvinists, 300 years of Yankee Calvinists. We ate very basic foods, meat and potatoes, nothing very interesting. Now here I was living with a Shuar who had never seen a bar of soap in their lives, and they ate some very peculiar foods, including people in the Amazon don't drink water because they know the rivers are filled with organic matter. And so they drink a kind of beer called chicha, which is generally made out of manioc root being chewed by women and spit. It's a spit beer, then you can mix that with water, and the alcohol kills the bacteria.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not very, it doesn't sound very attractive to most of us. And it's a very strange food. And so what I saw on this shamanic journey was that the Shuar themselves are very, very healthy. And they eat these foods and drink this beer. And so what I realized is that it was my mindset that was killing me, this attitude that every time I ate these foods or drank this beer, I heard a voice in the back of my mind saying, son, it'll kill you. It was probably my mom speaking. And I realized that it was just a question of changing my mindset, changing attitude, changing the story. The old story was that sort of stuff is dangerous to your health. The story I had to take on was that that's not true at all. It was very good food, in fact, very organic and local.
So when we talk about changing our story, it's what we pay attention to, the meaning we invest in it, and I guess to some degree the outcome that we imagine. So that our imagination is really taking the light, bringing it down from the creative impulse, then bringing it down from emanation into creation, then formation, and then we take action. That's a very Kabbalistic kind of run of the worlds, which lines up with theosophy and most traditions. So that we are these multidimensional beings, and you said, well, if we recognize that our biology, our DNA, is just light, then you're saying, as many have said, that we can change our biology with our attention.
Exactly. And, the story which, if I could have gotten to a medical doctor, but I was deep in the jungle, so there weren't any available, that would have been a totally different approach to solving my problem, which probably would not have solved it in the long run. It would have solved it temporarily. Perhaps I would have taken antibiotics or something, but I would have gone right back into it because it was a state of mind. So by changing my dream, and the Shuar and most indigenous people that I work with around the world are dream cultures. They understand that the dream, it doesn't have to just be the nighttime dream. It's our dream of the world. It's our vision of the world. It's our imagining of the world. It's our paradigm. The world is as we dream it, as we perceive it. And I think we get back to this idea of the story on a communal level. As a species, we've brought into this story of separation, separateness, and our science has taught us separateness. It picks everything apart. It goes into the separateness of it all. And our whole economy is based on separateness, and we believe we're separate. We are not. We are apart from, not a part of nature. This is the story we've been telling ourselves, and we're now in the process of changing that story. We're really in a time in between right now, which is a rather exciting time. And realizing that we need to move into a new story. That the story of separateness, separation, doesn't work, and it's not true anyway. We're not a part of. We're not a part from. We are a part of the world around us, and so we're moving into this new story, a story that of interconnectedness. What my friend Charles Eisenstein says it calls interbeing, moving into this new story that we must move into. But right now we're in that space between stories, which is a fascinating time, actually.
Mm-hmm. And yet it's so interesting to watch those those forces that enjoy the dialectic and enjoy duality and the power of polarization are pushing even harder. And whether it's terrorism in the Mideast or somewhere in the world, or somebody else going a little nuts and taking somebody else's life, it's this kind of grandiose last gasp of selfishness. So you do a beautiful job in talking about Aruba. And this is just one good example of a place that you and others are showing that these things we talk about, sustainability and water cycles and cosmic energy giving us everything, which is true, that it's possible to watch these things manifest now. This isn't a dream that's going to happen in 1,000 years. We're talking about making changes now. So tell us the Aruba story.
Well, I'm blessed, I think, to be able to travel to many places where lots is going on. And I think the little countries of the world now are teaching the big countries something. And the big countries like the United States, Russia, China are failing us in the story of interconnectedness. It's the smaller countries that are getting it. Ecuador, Iceland, Nicaragua, there's so many that I could list. But Aruba's a fascinating one. I was just there about a month ago, and Aruba drinks the ocean. Everybody in Aruba drinks salt water. They desalinate it, but it's the best water I've ever tasted in my life. I call it the champagne of water. And I think, that's the future for the world, really. And they're learning that you can grow incredible plants in saltwater marshes. You don't need fresh water to grow food. You can do it in salt water. And a third of their energy, their capacity, comes from wind. So here's this little country that's taking this leadership role in showing us how we can get better water. And, Washington, D.C., Baltimore area where you are, that water's foul.
Yes, it is.
The people from Aruba could teach you to have much better tasting water, and you wouldn't have to worry about drought. You can get it right from the ocean. And that's true everywhere in the United States. Boston, Chicago, New York, Miami, Los Angeles, the water's foul. Mm-hmm. And then there's so many parts of the world where the fresh water is drying up anywhere, where they can't get fresh water. That China and India are threatened by that with the melting glaciers. So Aruba has a tremendous role to play in serving a model in that area. Nicaragua is going to sustainable energy very, very quickly, faster than anybody else. Ecuador is teaching us things about how we can do away with debt and create new forms of money. Some of these smaller countries are taking a tremendous leadership role now, and we just need to wake up and listen to them, mm-hmm. and hear and learn from them.
And it's so interesting, returning to the indigenous shamanistic cultures and the preservation of these ancient oral traditions, and that the elders from all walks of life and all directions of the globe are speaking out now of their story, which is, it's just so interesting to watch things that my husband and I said decades ago, that the indigenous people will be the teachers of the world. And people would think, what are you talking about? It seems strange to people. Or when I used to say terrorism will bring the world together, and they think, that's ridiculous. Or that earth changes, climate change will bring the world together. So in Kabbalah we call this, or in the Hasidic tradition, we call this being pushed from behind. We can change through suffering, or we can change through joy. And what I think anybody who's ever worked in the inner realm of themselves knows that you can do a great deal just sitting where you are. So we're going to take our last break, and then I want to talk to you about that, because oftentimes people, we have many elders that listen to our program who may no longer feel like in the prime of their life. They're not going to run out there and go dig up the city parks for the planting, but they can do something else about planting good thoughts and planting prayers. And so I'd like to talk about what we do when we have some spare time, even sitting in a car, that can be of service to the world. If you've just joined us, I'm Zoh Hieronimus. John Perkins is our guest, a remarkable man. He does great things, and we'll have a chance to also talk about his beautiful organizations when we return.
Hello, this is Allison Stevens from Heifer International. You can find out more about Heifer International at www.heifer.org, and you're listening to 21st Century Radio with Dr. Zoh Hieronimus. Thank you, Dr. Zoh, for your time tonight. I really enjoyed sharing our mission.
Welcome back to 21st Century Radio. John Perkins joins us. He's written numerous books. I encourage you to visit his website, www.johnperkins.org, and pay special attention to psychonavigation, techniques for travel beyond time, Shapeshifting, techniques for global and personal transformation, and a new one about a great stress-free habit. So, John, I want to come back to before the break, when people feel so overwhelmed by the enormous change that we are all called to be part of, each in our own small way. No, none of us are going to do this alone. We're all going to do it together. How can an individual who feels they have no extra time, they're not going to workshops, they're not going to meditate, but they want to be an agent of change, what can they do?
Well, it's really a very personal thing. I think first of all, there's a generic answer, and that is to recognize that it's the corporations that are running the world. It isn't politicians, and we vote for politicians, and then they do what their corporate masters who provide the campaign financing tell them to do. And we need to keep putting pressure on politicians. So if people are interested in working through politics, they certainly encourage that. But also to understand that corporations are behind all of this. And so everybody can get involved in changing corporations, because the marketplace is a democracy if we choose to use it as such. Every time we buy something or decide not to, or invest in a pension plan or mutual fund or directly in stock, we're casting a vote, in essence. And so, anybody can, in this day and age with computers and the internet the way it is, can organize a consumer campaign. If you've got something against Monsanto or Exxon or Walmart or Nike, you can organize a campaign very, very easily, emailing, texting, whatever, 10, 20 people 2 or 3 times a week, and asking them to email 10, 20 people and send out, an email. And the corporations listen. If you tell Nike, I love your products, but I'm not buying them anymore until you pay your laborers in Indonesia a living wage, and they get enough of these emails, they're going to listen, because we're their clients and they're investors. So that's a generic answer. Beyond that is the more personal. I mean, we can all do that and should. Beyond that is everybody should follow his or her own passion. And I don't know what, and everybody who's listening, what their passion is or what their skills are. But I know that everybody has skills and passion. And if we all follow them but head for that same destination, of creating a world that we want our children and our grandchildren to inherit, an environmentally sustainable, socially just, spiritually fulfilling world, if we all head to that same destination, we'll get there.
Oh, man.
So someone like a carpenter, they build, houses and whatever they're making with as much social consciousness and environmental consciousness as possible. A dentist can talk to his patients when he cut his hands in their mouth. A housewife that brings her children up this way. We all have something to perform. People who are retired, I often talk to people who are retired and say, hey, how much tennis or golf or whatever can you play? It's time to get out there and, shake the cage a little bit. You can't be fired anymore. So write letters, send emails, mentor young people. There's a role for all of us, but each person should look to his or her individual passions and skills and follow those, because that's the only way we ultimately are successful and avoid burnout.
One of the areas that you have such this beautiful capacity now to share with others around the world comes from the shamanistic tradition and the mystery traditions, which is to use our inner, Ingo Swann used to call them bio-mind superpowers. So people have all different names for them, but it's our ability that it's non-local and outside time and space. And I'd like to use what little time we have left to talk about this as one of the important tools, not only for changing ourselves, maybe discovering things we didn't know about ourselves from this life, another life, a future life, or something we just didn't realize that we cared so much about. But if we just looked a little closer, we'd find something that's a mystery to ourselves. So talk to us a bit, John, about psychonavigation and how we literally can journey anywhere and anytime that we choose to.
Yeah, thanks. It's no secret, but our science and modern industry is often trying to discourage people from understanding the power that we have to shapeshift, to psychonavigate, and yet the story after story after story of how incredibly powerful this is. And I think we all know it, and I think that deep in our hearts we know that in fact the world is as we dream it. Every one of us has experienced it. When we really want something, when we give it energy, we get it. And sometimes we do that with things we don't really want. They're a fantasy. They're something we think we want, but when we actually get it, we say, God, why did I get that? And then you realize you gave it energy. You journeyed into it. And we can use that. And so it's important to give energy to the things we know we really want, not just the fantasies. And we can enjoy those on the kind of shamanic level, but we don't want them to actually materialize in this world. And, we can truly see this, too, on a global level. If we are convinced that the world is filled with enemies, that there's all of them out there, the terrorists, the people who are trying to destroy us, and then we're going to create a world of violence. We're going to continue to have this death economy, a war economy. But if we truly understand that we are all living on a very fragile space station, that unlike the one our astronaut built, has no shuttles, we can't get off, and everybody's in it, whether you're Muslim living in the Middle East and a member of ISIS, or whether you're here in the United States, we're all facing the same dilemma. And if we can come together and realize that the solution to this is love, it's truly to create a new story that's about love. And one of the organizations I founded, Dream Change, is having a huge, beautiful love summit for corporate executives to teach that the way to have successful business is through compassion, through performing a public interest. And that exactly grew out of this journeying process, this dream-changing process of realizing that it is going to be love and compassion that will create the new story, the story of interbeing, interconnectedness, that we know now that we must connect if we're going to survive, that we must complete if we're going to survive as a species. It's a phenomenal time for this, and to recognize that it is this inner journey that also becomes the outer journey. There's really no separation between them.
And that's been one of the interesting things coming out of sort of that New Age movement that started in the 60s with the Pluto and Leo, when everybody was sort of this open-heartedness, and we now have Jupiter in Leo, which is great because it expands everybody's heart. But we also have this extraordinary square between Pluto and Uranus that is bringing transformation so quickly and with such unexpectedness sometimes that oftentimes people want to grab on to the old when the old isn't what's stable. So share with us, if you don't mind, just some guidance about how we can create even internal places to go, or places we've seen that we love, a beach, a place in the mountains, and why these places, when we bring them to mind, actually strengthen us and reconnect our soul and spirit to the spirit of the land.
Tremendous power in all of that, and I think what you said at the beginning about the planetary alignments, we're truly entering the age of Aquarius now. And we got a piece of it back in the 60s, and now we're really going into it. And every indigenous culture that I've ever worked with or studied with or been with, and I've done that with indigenous cultures on every continent except Antarctica, where there aren't any, tells us that we've entered this time for the potential for huge transformation to a change of consciousness, basically, in human beings. And, I think that it's for each individual to recognize that you have that there's a sacred place in you, or there's a lot of them that you can go to at any given moment. Whenever there's a problem that you can seek advice there, the advice will come. Some place within you that you can just journey to. You can call it meditation, you can call it psychonavigation, but you go into this place where you feel absolutely safe and secure. And while you're in this space, you can call on help, and you'll get it. it comes. I've taught this to corporate CEOs. I saw it to New Age people. I taught it to all kinds of people. It's very, very powerful. The information is there. A renowned scientist, Thomas Edison, one time said, I didn't invent the light bulb. The idea was out there. I just tuned into it. And in fact, if you go to his laboratory in Florida, where he had two laboratories, one in New Jersey, one in Florida. I've been to the one in Florida. You see this laboratory of all these glass vials and test tubes and all this stuff. But then the guide will take you in and say, now I want to take you to the most important part of this laboratory. It's a little room outside with a cot. And every day for 20 to 30 minutes, Edison would go in there and psychonavigate. Mm-hmm. And that's where he got his ideas. And he said, what happened in that little room was the foundation for everything that he then put into physical form in the laboratory. It's the old shamanic idea that you journey to other worlds, which is what he did in that room, and you use power, energy, and wisdom to affect change in this world, and he did that through the energy of his laboratory. Mm-hmm. We all have that ability in whatever it is we do. Every writer, every musician, every artist, every creative person knows that to really produce good stuff, you've got to go to those other worlds. The great writer Homer, the great writer Homer always began all of his poems by saying, "Oh, muse, inspire me, bring me what I need to know in order to create this story." It's calling in it's being inspired, which means being in spirit, calling in spirit. It's imagination, and that comes from the word I magus, which means I, the magician, I, the shaman, I am the magician, I imagine. Imagination, thought, all of these things come to us from this other realm. And if we practice this ability to tune into that and ask for what it is we need, we get it.
Exactly. And it always comes back to, it's been interesting to me for 25, almost 30 years now, interviewing all these quantum physicists and technical, scientists, and then you interview the spiritists and the meditators. And it doesn't matter what field of work people have come from our vantage point on 21st century radio, almost 30 years now, it's unity consciousness, as you pointed out. And interestingly enough, in prophecy, the cornerstone in Judaism of prophecy is humility. And the other two aspects of it are courage and imagination. And as you know from your shamanic work, you can enter realms and worlds and see things you think are just, that's Hollywood imaginings. And then you realize that, no, it was the artist actually picking something up that does exist in other spectrums. And so this multidimensional world that you can enter is so vast that our culture, I feel, unfortunately, has scared everybody with Hollywood images that are so destructive, rather than knowing there's such great love, such great peace, such great wisdom, and so many beautiful elder beings on the other side and ascended masters who want to help us, that I really encourage everybody to sort of try to get rid of that fear of what you can't see and ask with love that what you can't see come to you. And it's really about what we ask for and what we accept, isn't it, John, in large measure?
I totally agree. And, a real indication of what you said about the fear-mongering of Hollywood is the prophecy of 2012, which Hollywood interpreted as doomsday, the apocalypse and all this. I've been studying with, hanging out with Mayan shamans since the 70s, and they always said that this new era that we are entering, that was marked by December 21st, 2012, is an era for the opportunity for tremendous positive change. It's not about doomsday. Hollywood turned it into something very different from what the ancient texts, the Popol Vuh of the Maya, say. And incidentally, every year I take people, a group of around 20 people, to hang out with, to spend time with the Mayan shamans in the sacred sites of Guatemala. And also this year, and that's in January of 2016, the next one, and I do one to the Kogi people, the elder brother, these very, very powerful shamanic peoples in the mountains of Colombia, right on the Caribbean coast. I do that trip in January, and if people go to johnperkins.org, they can come and join me. I wish you'd come and join me, Zohara, on one of these trips. It's phenomenal.
I think I'm going to have to fly there in my spirit body. I'm not much for moving the physical one around these days.
Well, I'm sure you do that very well, too. Yeah.
I do that better, actually, than actually physically flying my body. Well, your work is beautiful, and I see May 6th through the 9th, you have a beautiful The Age of Enoughism, and that's in Zurich, Switzerland. I mean, John, you definitely get around the world. And if there's a closing thought you'd like to leave our audience with, and I thank you in advance for crediting me with the banner of the life economy and death economy, because it's true. I mean, when I spoke to you, Spirit inspired me that this man travels the world and really can make use of this insight. So thank you. I really, really humbly thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome, and thank you very much, because, it's a major part of my new book, which will be coming out sometime in the next 18 months.
Good.
And the closing thought is just that I think we live in the most incredible time in human history. It's the greatest revolution human beings have ever experienced. But we're living at a time that's much bigger than the agricultural or industrial revolutions. It's a consciousness revolution. People are waking up across the planet, and now it's time to take action and to enjoy it, to understand that this is an amazing, incredible time. And it's important to really enjoy this.
I agree.
To understand that.
We're going to have to say goodnight. With love to John Perkins, www.johnperkins.org. 21st Century Radio is produced by Hieronimus and Company. Our executive producer and research assistant is Laura Kortner. Our engineer is Anita Brockington, and I'm Dr. Zoh Hieronimus.